Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Thought Leadership event series with Andrew Mewa of Tdk Ventures. We started this 4 months ago, and it's really building up momentum. Our company, Pitch Global, has been running entrepreneurial mentorship and investor events for almost a decade. And over the last couple of years during the pandemic, we have really segued to working with a lot of CVCs, corporate venture capital arms of large companies. And this is the area the market is moving to. According to CB Insights, the first 6 months of this year, CVC investments has equaled whatever was invested last year. So this is the area where there is 100% growth and there is tremendous interest, but there is gap in the market in thought leadership, and we have stepped in. We have really proven ourselves, kind of people we have brought, and kind of knowledge which we have got out from everybody on the panels is very unique. And we are recognized by US government programs and agencies, which has been our sponsors for the last few years. And now they have funded us to start CVC grant advisory programs and CVC accelerators. Once again, why that is unique is because most CVC thought leadership organizations are run by like CVC clubs where CVCs beat others. For us, we want to be two-sided marketplace where we bring together talented entrepreneurs and put them in front of CVCs because there is a lot to be learned from both sides. And one great example of how CVCs are disrupting the ecosystem is in our last event, we had our guest CVC was senior investor from Korea's SK Group. They were they have made several billion-dollar investments this year, and I just saw that they made a $4.5 billion deal with Bloom Energy, one of their portfolio companies, which really raised Bloom stock price. So once again, people think they'll get partnerships, then they'll get funding, but on the other hand, it could be the other way around. They may feel CVCs are for later stage, but we have companies like Tdk Ventures, which invest early stage. So the most important thing to do when we approach a CVC is to discard preconceived notions because change is happening so fast and our mind is stuck in a previous reality. And so if we can expand our perception and be very open, we are all entrepreneurs here will get uh, will be able to make connections and in terms of partnership and funding and get to the next level if there's the right fit. So on that note, today I want to explain the topic and why the people we have chosen does what they does and how they really add luster to the topic of today. So today's topic is how an entrepreneur can become part of the strategy of CVCs and corporates. What does it mean? That means most of the time they are not part of the strategy. Say sometimes this entrepreneur may be running from pillar to post and they may be presenting and pitching to a lot of people. And even for a CVC and a corporate, they may have looked at a lot of options and the options did not work out. So there's a last moment mutual fit between the two people. So that's a proactive way. That's a lot of that has been happening till now. But today we are going to discuss and see how one can move from proactive mode to from reactive mode to proactive mode. And in a proactive mode, instead of running around, how from the beginning a strategy can be created grounds up by entrepreneurs and corporates together. And the people we have today here, everyone adds luster and contributes a lot to this topic. So we are going to start with our two sponsors, Trinet and Skcpr. Trinet, brief background. they are a leader in PEO space, and PEO is what they offer is the single most thing which can enable an entrepreneur to hit the hockey stick, because they level the playing field between a Fortune 500 and an entrepreneur and a startup, so that you can hire senior people, have insurance costs, all these, on a similar field. We have Skcpr. We need PR because there is so much noise in the market. Even if you have everything what is needed, you need to stand out, and PR can shine the light. The third speaker, Eric Eklund of Telemetra, someone who has worked in strategy, started his career with Bain, and so he understands strategy. And we want to learn how working in strategy to running strategy for a startup is different, and what are their strategies in the future. Then we have presentation by Andrew Mower, investment director of Tdk Ventures. Andrew, among the sharpest CVCs we know, went to MIT and Wharton, was VC with in China before he moved here and helped start Tdk Ventures. And once again, they invest early stage. So that's another notion we want to remove from people, most entrepreneurs, because they are ignoring CVCs because they feel CVCs are later. And then we have two panelists. Uh, for the panel part, apart from Andrew, we have Deborah Maji, who is uh, in IBM Ventures for a long time. She has a global role. She has probably traveled to most countries in the world, and she's the bridge between IBM strategy and IBM Venture. So someone who's very pertinent to this topic. And last but not the least, we have Jerry Barano, who started US government program and agency in Silicon Valley to empower startup ecosystem and grew it. He's been an amazing mentor, and he picked us to become a satellite of government organization a few years ago. Now he has retired and moved to the East Coast, and he's mentoring us, Pitch Global, as EIR, Entrepreneur in Residence for CBCs. And uh, another part of this equation is that Eric Telemetrac has been successful in fundraising from government agencies, and we want that knowledge to also come out. And Jerry has some very important perspectives on how that works. So on that note, I am going to invite Megan Rice from Trinet to introduce Trinet, and then I'll invite Sharon Sim to introduce Skcpr.
Great. Thank you so much, Casey. I appreciate that. Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. I just want to speak just maybe 30 seconds. I know we've got a lot to cover this morning, but I think really as the world is seeing significant changes left and right, and I think really the way we do business is changing along with that, and really being able to adapt those changes, however unfamiliar or daunting, is really critical for sustainable business success. And, in my opinion, the biggest challenge I see startups face is this identifying and understanding the corporate landscape of the future, because as industries and technologies continue to evolve, as the new generations, enter the workforce, and as globalization increases competition, and as the nature of work responds and adapts to these environmental influences, it will really be human resources that will really strengthen an organization. Key requirement is really it's people, and with a partnership with Trinet, we've really been able to help businesses control costs, lower burn, and obviously extend that runway. And it's just a unique proposition that we can bring to the table that typically, startups and small businesses aren't able to take advantage of with a full HR outsourcing solution. So I appreciate, being here this morning and looking forward to the presentation. Thank you, Casey.
Welcome. Thank you, Megan. And now I hand over the floor to Sharon Sim, founder of Skcpr. And before that, I like to give some background, because part of what we do, like US government agencies funding us to go and network with CVCs, run CVC events, So part of this ecosystem building is also empowering audience to understand how things are connected. It's very important because someone on a surface level may just miss the point. So I want to briefly explain how I know Sharon, because I personally was very did some high level philanthropy. I was on the local board of Leukemia Lymphoma Society, top 30, philanthropy in US, and then I was mentor of their signature Man and Woman of the Year, campaigns. And the last time I did the mentoring few years ago, it was campaign of Emmy Award winner, Latino media icon Victoria Sanchez de Alba, and Sharon is Victoria's friend for a long time, and she came to a couple of those events, and that's how I know her. And then she has been guiding us, and even though she's based in LA, she used to be in Silicon Valley in the past, and she has brought senior editors of TechCrunch and USA Today and others to our event. So Sharon, can't thank you enough. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Casey, and welcome everyone. I actually also have with me, who had helped put this event together, my team members, Aaron Brown and Tristy Voma. Welcome everyone. We're very happy to be part of this event today. We're also clients of TriNet, by the way. Thank you, Megan. And I just want to say that I've known Casey for about 5 years now, and it is I believe helping startups really speak to my heart and my passion. And it's also something that SKC has thrown ourselves into all these years, supporting startups. Casey had, through the Pitch Global platform, created this amazing ecosystem where startups have found access to high-level VCs and investors that otherwise they would have to pay thousands of dollars for to go to other events. And as you know, this is a free event, so take full advantage of it. Ask as many questions as you like later on the chat, and Casey can help facilitate that. We're very, very happy to be part of this. We're honored to be able to be a resource to startups and to help you get to your dreams. So for me today, and at SKC, we're just going to share like a few little tips about PR before we segue to the main entree of the day. Consider us a little warm-up act. We are sharing our knowledge freely with you. Hopefully you can take and glean any kind of insights to help you run your startups from this session. And then we'll take it from there, okay? And before we dive into what we're going to talk about, the topic we're talking about today is just for a few minutes, is competing for funding, 4 ways PR can help. So Aaron and I are going to present that briefly, but Aaron would talk also a little bit on the logistics as well for this event.
Yeah, so as you have probably all noticed, we are keeping everyone muted and their videos off if you are not a speaker. And we're just doing this to make sure that everyone keeps quiet during the presentations. We don't want anyone to accidentally unmute. And it's just to help make sure that everything flows very smoothly. But that said, we will be doing Q&As. So if you do have a question for any of our speakers, you can put your question in the chat, and Casey will be monitoring those questions. So if your question is picked, Casey will read it out loud to the speaker. So if you do have questions, please do leave them in the chat. And I think that's all we have to say about today's logistics. So with that said, we'll move on to our short presentation on competing for funding, 4 ways PR can help.
Exactly. And we go about our days growing our companies, hunker down. But if we take a step back, like you're all doing today, which is wonderful, you can glean knowledge and then reapply to your company as you run it. So one of the things that that startups have found that PR is helpful for them is, well, actually here there are 4 ways, but one of the things that people may not know as much is PR really help position your company. Have you ever felt tongue-tied or ham and haw in an investor situation, in a potential customer situation, where they go like, what exactly does your company do? You're really confusing me. And this is where having a PR partner to help guide you and position you and message your company and your products and your technology to the marketplace is very helpful. Just think about Walt Disney. Somebody put a note about Walt Disney earlier, but just think about when he was starting Disneyland and how he could sell it. One of the reasons why he could sell it so well is because of his messaging. He talked about, hey, I want to create the happiest place on earth. Right away, it puts a picture in your head. So if you're able to create messaging that really resonate, that would be great. So for example, Bill Gates in the 80s, now everybody has computers, right? We have multiple devices at home. But in the 80s, that was brand new. And what did he sell? He said, I want to put a computer on every desk in every household. And we all got it. And look at where we are today. So positioning your company is critical to helping you propel the company to the next level.
Yeah, and building off of that, our next tip is that PR creates buzz. And this, if you've ever worked with a PR firm or a PR department before, they've probably talked to you about getting media coverage. And there's a reason this always comes up when you're working with PR, and that's because media coverage generates awareness and gets people talking. So through consistent and persistent outreach, your services and products are going to be featured in magazines, podcasts, blogs, news shows, newspapers, and that's going to introduce more audiences to your company. And one of the reasons we connected this with positioning is because if you have strong positioning for your company, that's going to help you create a strong and memorable pitch to media, and that in turn will help you get those placements. And one of the other things about creating buzz is that it actually can be valuable for your company, not just in terms of the media outlet publishing it, but then you can also further leverage that coverage by sharing it on your company's social media, on your website, on your blog, and also encouraging your customers to do the same, share that news, and it really extends your shelf life and helps to even expand the awareness even further. So for example, SKC previously worked with TrustGo, which was a mobile security startup company. And one of the things we worked with them on was building buzz through media coverage. And through our work, we did get them featured in a few top tier outlets. And this led to heightened attention from customers, and that eventually led startup to be acquired by Baidu, known as the Google of China. So that's just an example of how creating buzz can really help your startup out. And of course, there are way more examples than that, but that's one we wanted to mention because it's one that SKC worked on personally. And with that said, I'm going to turn it back to Sharon to talk about bullet number 3.
Yep. So bullet 3 is, from the buzz, you get one article here, one article there, you get on TV, all this stuff. It helps build credibility. It snowballs into a lot more opportunities for yourselves to get investors, to get partners, to get customers. And you probably will agree with me. It's much better than buying an ad or sending a direct mail or doing multiple posts on social media. It just doesn't come close. Those are all important, not to say they're not important, but getting the media's attention will really propel you to the next level. One of the example I can think about is a client called Turing Sense. Casey is also a consultant advisor to them. They do smart AI-based wearables. And there was an article that we got for them where they became the best yoga innovations, and they were featured in Forbes magazine. This was a couple years ago, but it's still getting a lot of traction for them. It's their calling card to getting investor meetings and all that stuff. So credibility, press coverage goes a long way for you, especially with the top tier media.
Mm-hmm. And to wrap everything up, our 4th bullet is that PR keeps you relevant. And you might be wondering how that could possibly be the case. Well, I'm sure, as many of you know, industries and trends evolve over time. And if you don't keep up with those changes, your company ultimately will be left behind. So your company really does need to adjust and realign long-term to keep up your appeal and your longevity in the marketplace. So how can PR help with that? Well, PR doesn't just do media coverage and messaging. We are also your eyes and ears to the changing industry and marketplace. And we help to provide those critical insights that can really help you stay relevant and tweak your response to those changing forces. We can also help you understand what's going on in the media industry. So are there new social media channels coming up? Like, for example, TikTok or Clubhouse? We can help you get in on those right away. Are there different media outlets that you haven't been working with that maybe could be beneficial? We can create those lists and help you diversify who you're reaching out to for press coverage. And we can also help you identify new market niches so you can diversify your customer base and reach new audiences. So ultimately, PR can help you stay relevant in the long term, and that's why it's really important to start investing in it for your startup. So just to conclude our little presentation here on public relations, it's important to remember that when you're competing for funding, you really need to stand out from the pack. And PR, as we've listed, has many advantages to help your company become distinct, memorable, and reach the investors you're trying to get in touch with. So if you haven't considered PR yet, here are 4 reasons why you should. And there are also many more that we don't have time to cover today. So yeah, thank you for your time on this presentation. And now I'm going to hand it back over to Sharon.
Great. And we actually also are VIP members of Business Wire. So if you mention Pitch Global in your outreach to us, Erin, if you can type in my email or your email in the chat, we're happy to provide a half-hour complimentary consultation. And if you want to use the Business Wire to send your releases out, we can apply our VIP discount for you. That's it. Back to Casey.
Great. Thank you, Sharon. And when Jerry introduces himself before the panel, he will briefly talk about our other sponsors, Tech Futures Group and NorCal SBDC. Now we are going to get into the entrepreneur's perspective. And I'm very proud of this portion per se, particularly because it is very difficult to bring an entrepreneur's perspective and then have CVCs and others comment on it and weave it into their point of view. But we feel this is the future, and we are really excited to pick the right entrepreneurs who we know for a long time. So today's entrepreneur is Eric Eklund of Telemetrack. Brief background, he's also my friend from San Francisco for almost a decade. And today's we are talking about how strategy, how an entrepreneur, how a startup can become part of the strategy of a corporation and CVCs. And here, this is the person who started in strategy at Bain. So why don't we first introduce Eric? Eric, say hi to everybody. Hello. Before we go into the depth. And before we go into the depth of what Telemetrack does and what's the future, we want to ask you, hey, what's your experience working within strategy for Bain, and how has it changed after you became an entrepreneur?
Okay, that's an interesting question. I worked at Bain and also at McKinsey. They're 2 of the really top 3 strategy consulting firms, and the job of a strategy consultant is to solve a difficult strategic type, very high level problem for a client, for a company. And there are some key differences you go through a similar process if you're an entrepreneur and starting a company, but there are some key differences. The main one is that as an entrepreneur, you actually have to implement the solution. The strategy firms, Bain, McKinsey, BCG, Boston Consulting Group, that is, they take pride in saying, we don't implement, somebody else does that. We don't want to get our hands dirty. The real reason is they don't get paid nearly as much for the implementation work, but because they never have to implement, they typically come up with very complex solutions. The partners running these firms, they like to deliver very complex strategy solutions for a number of reasons. One, it makes them look smart, makes it clear to the client that you have to pay McKinsey $500,000 for this presentation. It's so complex. The company, which is run by smart people, they're just overworked. They don't have time to do that. That's why it makes sense to pay them the $500,000 invoice for the strategy consulting work. The problem is these very complex solutions are difficult to implement, and a company that doesn't really have the intellectual horsepower to come up with a solution like that, they probably don't have what's needed to implement it either. So in many cases, these strategy consulting solutions are sort of wouldn't say a waste of time, but the net result can be zero in many cases. My guess is about half the time nothing actually happens. There are famous stories of a partner actually at McKinsey told me he once went in to present. He was trying to sell more work to a client. He came up with he basically already solved the problem, and it was explaining how they would go through the process of making sure his idea was correct. The client leaned back in his chair and said, "Yeah, I've heard that last year. BCG told me that last year. In fact, here's their deck." He pulled out the same solution from one of the other top 3 firms, and they just hadn't had time to implement it. So that's a problem if you're at a strategy consulting firm. And it's not that much fun if you've really put everything you have into it for months and months and some very late nights to come up with the best possible solution. Then you have a bump into the client a year later and ask, "So what happened?" And they sort of sheepishly admit that, "Well, nothing, actually. We haven't been able to start that yet. We have to hire people just to implement that solution." Now, if you're an entrepreneur, you go through a very similar intellectual process. It's earlier. The first question is, okay, am I going to quit my current job and work without income for an undetermined length of time in order to implement or to build a company that can do this? To answer that question, you have to go through the typical strategy consulting process of figuring out, how big is the opportunity? Who are the competitors? Does this make sense? Could we build a business of this? And so on. You have to answer that question before you ask yourself the next one. Am I going to give up my steady income to put everything into this new opportunity? And then of course, if you're coming up with a strategy solution yourself, there's nobody, especially at a startup, the people in the same room with you, and that might just be 1 or 2 other people, they have to implement it. So you want to be careful to come up with something that's actually doable. I think those are the key differences: strategy at McKinsey or Bain versus strategy at a really early stage startup. But by early stage, I mean before the company's even gotten started. So that's I did when I was at Bain, my favorite client was a Swedish networking equipment optical switch company that I later joined, and we started very early stage with them as well. But they had already raised money. They already had a team of 8. They already had a sort of an initial product. They just needed Bain's help to figure out what markets to address with that. So that's the earliest stage I ever worked at a company when I was a strategy consultant, and that's unusually early stage. But if you're starting your own company, you're starting 2 or 3 years before even that. The initial question is, will I drop what I'm doing now and figure out some other way to pay the mortgage until we can get this thing off the ground? So.
That's great. That's a very unique perspective. Love it. Now, Eric, why don't you say how you got together with your co-founder and how you started Telemetric?
In a bar, actually. We were having a drink in a bar, and my co-founder, Fred, he's the smart one. He's the inventor and CTO. He describes me as the people person. I spend most of my time talking to people, not actually building anything. He and the rest of the engineers. I'm an engineer as well, but because I have an MBA, I tend to deal with investors and so on. But Fred and I, we've been friends for years. We were literally having a drink on a Sunday evening in the marina in San Francisco. And he said, "Hey, I'm doing something interesting with a chassis leasing company." "Oh, a chassis? You mean those funny looking trailers that carry containers around?" I'd done some strategy work in the container shipping, intermodal container shipping industry before, so I knew what he was talking about. Most people would have gone right over some other people's heads. He said, "Yeah, it's kind of interesting. They want to track these things, but they really can't because these trailers don't have consistent electric power. Over half the time, there's no electric power available unless you're riding the brakes. Unless you have the brakes on all the time, there's no power available." So the client I had, he was doing sort of some individual tech consulting work for one of these chassis or container trailer leasing companies. They had bought 400 solar powered tracking devices for these chassis, and they really weren't working. They had a chassis stolen. Their customer, which is was a trucking company. These chassis only have one real purpose in life. That's to go to a port where you can put a container on them, and then you deliver the container someplace else by road. This had happened in Miami. A container. It's called a drayage company. That's a business of getting containers from by truck and moving them from ports. The drayage company, the client had called the trailer leasing company up and said, "Hey, somebody just hijacked the entire rig that is held. It's someplace in Miami. Somebody held a gun pointed a gun at the driver and said, "Give me your keys, or I'm going to take your keys one way or another." The driver very sensibly said, "Okay, why don't you just take them here and go for a drive?" So he called. He got on his mobile phone, said it's been stolen. No problem. We've got tracking on this thing. But the tracking device reported a location in the middle of the North Atlantic, 20 minutes after the theft. This was clearly a mistake. The real problem was that these tracking devices, the solar powered devices, don't work, because the only time a chassis, a container trailer is doing anything useful is when it has a container on top of it. And surprise, surprise, the 40-foot long steel box with 25 tons of cargo, and it has a way of blocking the sun, cutting off the power. So anyway, Fred realized that there is a way to, tracking devices need electric power. Solar panels don't work. That's been proven. These people are not willing to change batteries, and there's no external power available. However, there's a lot of kinetic energy in these things. They weigh 30 tons or more at any speed. And kinetic energy, you'll recall, is 1/2 the mass times the velocity squared. If the mass is 30 tons, you don't need a lot of velocity to get a lot of kinetic energy. So Fred started figuring out ways to harvest some of the kinetic energy, convert that to electricity to run the tracking device. And so he's the smart one. My insight was that, well, there are even more containers than there are chassis out there. And I
don't know why.
Was there a question? Forgive me. Oh, no problem.
Go ahead.
Okay. My insight, if any, was that well, this will work on trailers, I think, or if this works on trailers, that's great. But there are even more containers out there, and in fact, there are about, in the United States, for example, there are 725,000 chassis container trailers, but worldwide there are about 30 million containers in service. If you line them up end to end, they'll go around the whole planet 8 times. There are a lot of those big ugly boxes out there, and we're heavily dependent on them. 95% of manufactured goods. So basically everything in the rooms we're sitting in that's not breathing was in a container at some point, the clothing and furniture and so on. They're really important. To modern life would basically grind to a halt. In fact, that's starting to happen. There are over 100 container ships at anchor off the ports of LA and Long Beach in Southern California, because the port is so badly overloaded. They can't unload the containers. That's a traffic jam that's getting worse, and shelves are starting to go bare in places. Walmart had to ration or limit purchases of toilet paper recently because they can't get toilet paper in fast enough and stuff. Walmart, those people know how to move cargo around. Even they're having problems. So there's an epic mess in container shipping, and there are a number of reasons for that. But one of them is they don't know where the containers are when they're on land. Why? Because there's no tracking. Why? Because there's no electric power. So that's a problem we can address. Maersk told us that they have not even heard of. Maersk is the world's largest ocean carrier. They have 700 container ships, and they own over 4 million containers on their own. They have told us that they are not even. They've been looking, and they have not found anyone else who can do what we can do. So we think we're nicely positioned.
Great. Before we delve into Maersk, because that's what working with corporates and all our discussion is all about, why don't you share your fundraising experiences so far, and both dilutive and non-dilutive?
Okay, good. The fundraising has been done primarily through individual angels, or single largest investor. He offered us another $150,000 last week, actually. So once that comes in, we should have that within a couple of weeks. Then he will have put $400,000 in. So he's a super angel. He never. I'm not allowed to mention his name because he gets a lot of phone calls, but he's a great guy. So most of the fundraising has been done through individual angels. He is a member of one of the big angel groups, Caltech Angels. And they are, in my experience, far and away the best of the angel groups. It's all engineers in that group. They actually read the pitch deck before you. They all want the deck a week before your presentation. None of them read it, with the exception of Caltech Angels. So they show up at the meeting, the Zoom meeting, ask intelligent questions. It's much more fun answering smart questions than dumb ones. I've had some very bad experiences with some other angel groups, which I won't mention. But it's someone. 2 or 3 years ago, another startup founder said the problem with angel groups is they can really waste your time. They think they're VCs, but they're not. And I wasn't quite sure what he meant by that. I think what he meant was, in most cases, they pretend they're going through due diligence, but they're really not. They won't put the work in. VCs actually will. If they start doing due diligence on you, they take it very seriously. The angel groups, in my experience, with the exception of the notable exception of Caltech Angels, they're really not doing a lot of due diligence. It's mostly just rude questions and stuff. Now, in terms of non-dilutive funding, the US government has an awful lot of money. They're printing it as fast as they can. They're borrowing more from China, but the net result is the US government has a great deal of money, and there's a lot of non-dilutive funding available from the government. So for example, about a month ago, we applied for a Department of Energy grant. They have something called the Solar Prize. That'll, if we get that, and I think we have a 50-50 chance at getting that, that would be $50,000 just in a grant. They will say, I hope they will say, you guys have a good idea. Here's $50,000 to explore it. Now, an even better opportunity is through the Defense Department, specifically the Air Force. They have it's called the AFWorks. It's formerly known as a Program Office of Air Force Research Labs. It's basically the US Air Force's venture arm. They need new technology, and they found that, you know, the Lockheed Martins of the world, they can build fabulous planes and stuff, incredible, the best fighter aircraft in the world, but it takes them 10 years. Or more. You could take 20 years to get a new fighter aircraft built. They have to innovate faster, especially for simpler problems. And they understand smaller companies are able to innovate faster. So they're doing a lot to work with smaller companies. If anybody wants to know more, just contact me later. But AFWorks is what it's called, AFWERX. So they gave us a $50,000 R&D contract. It was called an AFWorks Phase 1 SBIR, SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research. It's not actually a grant, it's actually an R&D contract. It comes out of the Air Force R&D budget, not the operations and maintenance budget, R&D. That's important for reasons I won't bore you with right now. But we've been told we have a better than 90% chance of getting a phase 2, which will be 15 times bigger. So we're expecting the formal approval of that within a month or two or something. It's because an Air Force colonel, we call her the gal with a golden pen. It makes her sound like a James Bond villain. She's actually a very nice woman, and she has 1,000 people working for her. We managed to get her to sign a document saying, yes, we want this. This is not some junior clerk with a rubber stamp who started yesterday. She's been in the Air Force for 20 years, and she has over 1,000 people working for her. So she says she wants it, and that's why we think we can get this.
Eric, that's great that our sponsors, US Government Tech Futures Group,
very helpful.
All the work is working. So we are really great to, and I'm glad that you met pitch to Caltech Angels in our event and got dialed in.
Yeah.
And got majority of your investments. So I think this is ecosystem building at a really high level. So now let us, since we are running out of time, there'll be a couple of questions. I'm going to give you both and then try to weave that in. Okay. We want you to first lead us, let us know how you work with Maersk. That's really important because Maersk is a corporate and you're working with them. And you've also had some dialogues with some of our other investors like Tdk Ventures. Then in Mexico, you are working with IBM and we have IBM Ventures here. So maybe, this is a longish question, but just club both. Start with Maersk and then talk about what you're doing in Mexico, how IBM could help you more. And I know Jerry just connected you with Arca Continental.
Right.
Reconnected you because he had a call, and they are one of the most well-known CVCs in Mexico. They are Coca-Cola's biggest distributor, and they have presence in multiple sectors, and they are very interested in transportation. So why such a long question is because we don't have time to ask 2 questions. So you know the drill. Just start your experience in CVCs and end it with say, what do you think the future portends? And what is your message to other entrepreneurs? So this answer will take probably 6-7 minutes to answer. Try to keep it around 5-6 minutes. And so that we can get on to the main program once, you are done with this question. So floor is yours, brother.
Okay, thank you. There are a number of companies that could be customers of ours. Maersk is top of the list. That's the world's largest container ocean carrier. It's known as an ocean carrier. Maersk, it's a Danish company which is reporting record profits right now. It's sort of 35% net margins. It's just off the charts because ocean freight rates are up by 10x in places. They're just printing money. So Maersk is a customer of ours. They're testing our stuff. They have a very small venture arm, which is poorly funded. So we really think of Maersk as a customer more than as an investor, because Maersk growth appears to have very little capital to play with. IBM, of course, is another huge successful company, which has a bigger venture arm, IBM Ventures, which has more money, which is of interest. And Maersk and IBM have a joint venture called TradeLens. They're using blockchain technology to handle all the paperwork and container shipping, which is kind of nightmarish at the moment. Actually, it would be great if there were a distributed ledger and everybody could see the paperwork and everybody knew that there were nobody was getting it wrong or putting in fake information or anything like that. So IBM actually, they were aware of what we're doing, and they approached us a few months ago about a large customer in Mexico, a top 5 retailer that moves a lot of cargo around various stores and across borders and stuff, that needs a better tracking solution for trailers, and they don't want to deal with batteries. External power is not available. They don't, even in Mexico, solar power is not enough. So they approached us about that. So IBM would be a potential channel for us or customer. They could also be a potential investor. We are a customer of TDK. We use their accelerometer. It's the ICM 20948. It's the best one. We didn't buy it just because Andrew Maywah is such a nice guy. He is, but that happens to be the best accelerometer. Fred looked into this very carefully. My co-founder, Fred, the CTO and inventor, he looked into this. He really dug deep on this. Yeah, that's definitely the best one. We want that. So TDK, they of course have Andrew's about to speak, so unless I talk too long, cut me off. He's more interesting than I am. But Tdk Ventures, we have had some initial discussions with Andrew. I'd love to pursue those. And we're we are a customer of TDKs. You know, if we manage to get our tracking device into every one of those 30 million containers out there, then we'll have to buy 30 million ICM 2948 accelerometers or IMUs from TDK. AC, Arca Continental, they're a potential customer and a potential investor. It's basically a Coca-Cola bottling and distribution company in Mexico where people drink a lot of Coca-Cola. This is a very profitable company. They have a venture arm called AC Ventures. And one of the interesting problems they have is their refrigerators get stolen a lot. They have a lot of, if you go to Mexico, you'll see a lot of refrigerators that are outside the cafe or the bar or whatever. These things actually get stolen. And the surprise, there are no tracking devices in these refrigerators. We could very easily put a tracking device, a concealed tracking device inside these refrigerators. So at least they could find them if they get stolen. They could tell the police, hey, someone stole our fridge, but here's where it is. Please help us go get it back. So that's a potential customer as well. What the future portends, I would love to work with any or all of those CVCs. It's not clear to me how often CVCs lead rounds. It sounds like most of the time a venture round is led by a sort of a traditional financial VC. I could be wrong. Andrew will tell me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that most of the time you want to find a financial VC to lead a round, and then they're very happy if you can give them some phone numbers of CVCs who already know the story. Then they'll get people to join the round there. Yeah.
Great. Eric, we have run out of time, but this was very illuminating. We managed to get things and perspectives which are hidden. It's called tacit knowledge in philosophy, which knowledge which really needs, but by the time knowledge becomes knowledge when an expert conceptualizes it and anoints it as knowledge. But in Silicon Valley tech world, change happens so fast. By the time an expert says this is knowledge, it ceases to be knowledge. So at Pitch Global, we want to be like CNN says they are breaking news. We want to be breaking knowledge by bringing people like you and Andrew and Deborah and Jerry and all together. So once again, much respect, very thanks. Please stay around because the panel will comment on some of what you said, and that's what we want. So now it's my pleasure and privilege to introduce our main speaker for today, someone who we are working with to have launched this Tdk Ventures Andrew Maywah thought leadership event. This is our fourth one, and we have many in store. The more we run this kind of events, more concepts we get. And I think the concept for this event came out of our last event with SK Group as the guest CVC. And once again, brief introduction to Andrew. I already said before, but we were looking for someone who really understood, who has very deep perspective, who's very open, and who also invests early stage. That was important as well because we want more and more entrepreneurs to take a look and consider CVCs. So Andrew, once again, he attended MIT and Wharton, was investor VC in China for a long time before he relocated to Silicon Valley and helped start TDK Ventures, and someone we really appreciate and who has brilliant insights. And once again, it is my pleasure to host and someone of his eminence over and over again. So floor is yours, Andrew.
Great. Thank you, Casey, for the wonderful introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Maywam. I'm with Tdk Ventures, and today I'll be presenting a keynote on how startups can become part of a corporate partner's strategy. And I want to frame this for you. I believe that in order to influence a corporate strategy, you do need a partnership. I don't want to sugarcoat this. You can't just start from nowhere. There does need to be a partnership. So I'll be presenting this in the context of an already existing partnership. And I'll share a little bit about how you can develop that partnership and how you can then bridge the gap between that partnership and then becoming a meaningful part of a corporate partner's strategy. So here's the agenda. First, I'll share a little bit about Tdk Ventures. Then I'll dive into becoming part of a corporate partner strategy, and then conclude with some Q&A. So about Tdk Ventures. Tdk Ventures is a technology-focused venture fund based in San Jose and Boston, Massachusetts. We invest globally in seed and early stage startups that leverage fundamental material science to unlock an attractive and sustainable future for the world. We do have two funds managing a total of $250 million. We invest early stage and we invest globally. A little bit about our core values. Here's our code of conduct. First, focus on contributing to society. We have one team reaching for the sky. Everybody works together. We deliver deep insights on all the areas where we invest. And we're very much focused on putting entrepreneurs first. As for our investment criteria, we basically invest in the global king of the hill. This is where we find venture financial returns, strategic value with synergies, and an attractive and sustainable future. And some of our key members of the team, you'll see I'm there, and we have a number of members of the team who help our startups become very successful. And in terms of our investment categories, here are basically our investment categories. I'm not going to read all of them, but it's from industrial mobility to clean tech, energy, computing, connectivity. Some of our portfolio companies. And now we get to dive into sort of the main part of the presentation. How can startups become part of a corporate partner's strategy? And like I said before, it starts with partnership. Partnership is key. And the potential for collaboration is big, but it has to work. It has to be, to make it work, it has to be seen as a partnership. And there are many different motives for partnership. There are many different reasons why startups and corporates might explore partnership. And here we have some of those reasons, for example, getting market access for the startup, positive signal to industry and investors, acquiring the corporate partner as a future customer, things like that. And we acknowledge that they're across these many different reasons for the startups, they're looking at different ways to get more involved. We also acknowledge for the corporates, for all the reasons that they build partnerships, they're also looking for ways to get deeper involved. And there are different types of partnerships. We see that could be working as part of an incubator, an accelerator, to even more involved collaborations. However, I want to stress, not all of these collaborations are very close. In fact, some of them could be more arm's length transactions. And really, at the end of the day, if the startup wants to be part of the corporate partner strategy, it has to be on a much deeper level than an arm's length transaction. A little bit quickly about starting a partnership. Again, I want to stress that partnership is required. And to do that, you really do need to have your research ready, be prepared for all meetings, identify the key stakeholders, build a relationship with the stakeholders, turn them into champions. You need to be flexible and adapt to different feedback, but ultimately set common goals and be clear on expectations. And really, it's all about finding all the different ways that you can work together, the startup and the corporate, to create value. But really, what we see often happening is for a large number of corporates, their survival depends on their ability to serve an ever-evolving set of customer demands, creating business models for the future, and understanding how various industries will digitize and converge. This is important. A lot of large corporates may not survive if they're not able to do this effectively. And I think this is where the startups can help. And this is where startups can leverage their resources to become part of the corporate partners' long-term strategy. We see that because of this rapid pace of market change, the corporates need to find the right partners that have these radical innovations, and also other partners that can help them put together these innovations to create value. So it's finding the right partners that can do this. The startups need to put themselves on the radar of their corporate partners as being the parties that can help to do this. And it's not always obvious. The startups do come with value. They provide insights into new market opportunities. They have access to new and innovative technologies, and they also have access to unique and special talent. But you know, it's not just about having that. If you're only doing transactional interactions with the corporate, it won't help. What you need to do is create a shared vision for larger mutual business opportunities in the future. And creating this shared vision for these larger opportunities requires startups and corporates to build a very strong foundation and framework. They have to really understand how to create stability without coming across as too regimented, scripted or prescriptive. And it requires them to value the cultivation and sharing of new ideas. So again, this is bigger and deeper than just transactional relationships, buying and selling of products or licensing of technology. It's more about how to share a wide range of ideas and create value together, create large value together. And that is where the startup can really influence the corporate partner strategy in the long term. There's some key questions to ask. Each startup really needs to find the answers to these questions, and it's through the answers to these key questions, they'll have a better idea of how they can really be part of the corporate partner strategy. So questions like, what does the corporate partner want or need? I mean, really understanding that, and that may require lots of research and conversations. What unique value does the startup bring to the table? And I think that, we see that in the marketplace, there can be at times many startups that bring similar types of value. So for you, the startup, how do you distinguish yourself as bringing unique value to the relationship? What are some areas that the startup can contribute to the partner? There could be many, and you probably want to prioritize those and identify the ones that are most pertinent. And then how would these contributions directly benefit the corporate partner? Is it increased revenues? Is it decreased costs? Is it new types of thinking? Whatever it might be, understand what the benefits are and what are the tangible benefits for the corporate partner. And then putting it all together, the startup needs to create a vision for the long-term value creation. This would be a shared vision. And so you start by looking inward. Honestly, look at what the current market situation is, but not be satisfied with the way things are. Start to create a huge, massive dream for what the future could be. This is where I see startups really adding something really special to the mix, because in many cases, the startups can build those massive dreams, and it's in how they shape and form those dreams that can really add a lot of value. Startups should also reflect on their core values. What's important to them? What is meaningful to them? And then brainstorm the future strategies for achieving that massive dream. There could be many directions. There could be many partners you could work with. Which ones do you think are the right ones? And then develop options for paths forward. And this is key because you want multiple options. There's not one single path. There could be multiple paths, and you may want to understand the benefits and risks of these various paths. But once you have an idea of the various paths and a plan, involve your corporate partner. Find ways to communicate that vision and build consensus with that partner so that the partner is really invested and sees the benefits and really sees that this is something that is beneficial for the long term. And it's through that you would develop a plan for action and then execute. This is how you would bring all those ideas, all that talent, all the value, all the innovation that the startup has, and then in conjunction with the corporate partner, create value for the long term. And in doing so, the startup will become part of the corporate partner strategy for the long term in very meaningful ways. But it doesn't stop there. It's all about having the right behaviors to keep things going. So what are some of those right behaviors? The courage to speak up, to challenge management, to hold a mirror up to the business and see that things are moving forward according to your values. Continuous improvement of skills for influencing, building relationships and communication. This is critical because you're constantly going to need to be able to communicate different aspects of this strategy as your startup is being woven into the long-term strategy of the corporate. Persistence, this is key. In many cases, you'll reach areas that may slow down. You might reach speed bumps, but if you're persistent, you'll continue to press on and move towards achieving that massive dream. Understanding the constantly evolving business landscape. This is an area that you constantly need to be doing. And as you're doing so, it'll add more value to that long-term strategy. And lastly, the ability to translate numbers into a business story. I think a lot of corporates like numbers because numbers are measurable and you can see how things are working. But that's not the only thing that's important. It's also important to see how that weaves into the business story and in effect, the long-term strategy. So these are important key behaviors that you as a startup should continue to then continuously be part of the corporate partner's long-term strategy. And so with that, I'll open it up to questions. Okay, are we ready for the Q&A?
I'm not sure where KC is.
I have one question. I'm curious how often CVCs lead rounds, and is it half the time, less than half the time, more than half the time? It's slightly off topic, but it is one question I had.
Every CVC is different. Some lead, some don't lead, and it's a function of their objectives. In some cases, the CVCs are leading because they're more financially aligned, and they see that as an opportunity to sort of build out those financial alignments. In some cases, some CVCs may be more strategically aligned, in which case leading around is not as meaningful. It depends. And so and in fact, now what I'm seeing is there are a wide variety. I mean, there's so many CVCs coming onto the market. It's really.
They think host is not allowing participants to unmute themselves.
Any other questions?
Yeah, can people hear me now?
Yes.
I am. Okay, I think I got slotted into the audience bucket. So I still cannot see the video, but that's fine. The question is, there is some IP issues, which one of our entrepreneurs, Daryl, asked. Daryl is very concerned about IP. So when you are getting into the strategy of a corporation, what is a good way of dealing with IP issues?
Well, it's very important to, from the very start, be clear on what is your IP and what is the IP that belongs to the other parties who you're working with. And then spell out how, through that sort of partnership, the various aspects of the IP will be handled. So for example, let's say you're working together and you create a joint development agreement. It oftentimes in that agreement will spell out exactly who owns what IP, and as you're working together, how that IP is assigned and how various IP is licensed. And so that kind of document will go into great detail on how that mechanism would work. And I definitely recommend to both startups and corporates to spend a lot of time on that and have a clear understanding. Because if it's not done well, in some cases it may lead to some confusion about IP, and that may potentially lead to difficulties in the relationship.
That's great. Andrew, one question about your, I think, second last slide, where you said there were all these 7 factors, how you can get deeper. Now, what advice do you have to entrepreneurs to navigate the political system within corporations? Because when change happens, new management comes in, or there's a churn at the top, they may be looking for scapegoats. And if an entrepreneur has a foot in the door, and that they could become a scapegoat. On the other hand, if they really ingrain themselves into the long-term strategy of a corporation, then they become indispensable. So how can an entrepreneur quickly make themselves indispensable even before a company has not put significant skin in the game?
That's a great question. I think you're absolutely right. Number one, the startup needs to find different ways to become indispensable. And part of that is on contributing to areas of interest of the corporate that directly affect the bottom line. So whether it's revenues or whether it's some kind of cost, this is one way that a lot of startups choose, because it's very clear the value you're bringing. And if you can increase top line significantly, and you can also, and if you can also reduce cost significantly, that will usually mean that you have a strong relationship there. Another thing that I would recommend is building relationships at different levels of the organization. Some startups think, oh, well, I'll just have a relationship with the CEO and CFO and that's good enough. Actually, I would submit that having a relationship at different levels on product development, on distribution, different parts of the organization with the corporate is key, because not only does it give you different ways to offer value to the corporate, but it also helps you, again, show that you're indispensable to so many different parts of the organization. And it's not just value that you're creating to the corporate, but you could also create value for the corporate's other partners, suppliers, and vendors as well. Those are also other ways to make yourself indispensable. If you're a key partner with one of their key customers, regardless of management change, they'll be probably more reluctant to let you go if you have that kind of relationship. And really, at the end of the day, the more relationships you have with the organization, the better you'll understand how change is coming, and then better able to react to that change. And in doing so, that gives you a firmer footing to have and maintain that long-term relationship with that corporate partner.
That's great. That was very insightful, Andrew. And that was my next question, but you already answered it. This building relationships at different levels, different segments, different, even in different countries, that can strengthen the roots for sure. I'll just give an example because I like to look at what people are commenting. There is someone who wrote, fashion is second largest polluting industry, and they have created game-changing technology for global fashion supply chain. Now they are approaching companies, say they approach a CVC. Maybe that CVC may not respond too much at the beginning, but maybe the corporation's core values are about countering pollution, and they may have strong, CSR arm. And maybe if this company approaches the CSR arm, which is often a pet project of the top of the CEOs, or even if it's privately owned or if it's a family-owned corporation, a lot of the time their next generation or spouses or children of the owners are very into they are driving the CSR initiative. Maybe that could be a segue if they really start engaging, through this level kind of channels. It could be a segue into the main funding and partnership. What do you say, Andrew?
Absolutely, I agree. I think that as we see corporates growing and embracing the ever-changing landscape of legal and regulatory, corporates need to keep up, and many of them are adopting a number of initiatives in the CSR framework to help them to better align with sustainability, global sustainability, and really we can see bring meaningful benefits to the world. And so for startups, I think that as a startup, if you can find, or if you can identify that as an opportunity to add real and meaningful value, that's one way to really sort of create and strengthen that relationship, and then bolster other opportunities to create value with that corporate together. And so I highly recommend startups to look into that. CSR initiatives is also avenues for starting relationships and partnerships, and also building long-term partnerships where they can eventually affect the strategy of the corporate.
Great. Andrew, thanks very much. Now we move on to our last segment, and which is the panel discussion on the same topic, where of course you are participating, so please stay. And before I hand over the floor to Jerry, I want to introduce Deborah of IBM Ventures, someone I know for last few years, someone who has a global role in IBM. She has probably gone to most countries in the world, and she's a bridge between IBM Venture and IBM Strategy, someone who fits into this topic exactly. In fact, we go the other way around. The way we pick, the topic is first we pick the CVC, guest CVC. We already have Andrew every time, and we pick the guest CVC. Depends on the background of the guest CVC. We pick a startup who could fit into the discourse, and then we create the topic for every month. So after I talked to Deborah at an in-person event we co-hosted a few weeks ago, I said, wow, she's the link between strategy, and this kind of person is very difficult to find. So then why not make today's topic how startups can get into a strategy, woven themselves into the fabric of the strategy of a corporation instead of just trying to be reactive all the time. So it's my tremendous pleasure to introduce Deborah Majid, tremendous mentor of Silicon Valley ecosystem and a global person. So Deborah, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so great to see you again. I saw you in person last time, which was even better.
Yeah.
So I just want to say a couple of words before we get Jerry on here. I've been in IBM Ventures for a long time, and the venture landscape has changed a lot. So my job is more global than it was originally. 10 years ago, there was no particular reason to go to Kuala Lumpur, and today there's a lot going on there. So, the venture ecosystem has become more vibrant for various reasons. And so I have relationships all over the world, and I sit in a joint organization that is run by the same person, corporate strategy and corporate development. So I'm actually in the strategy organization as well. I've also at times been in the business units, and I have deep relationships inside IBM across all of the businesses and externally with the VC and startup communities and others who care about entrepreneurship, like law firms and universities and governments and so forth, because it's a very vibrant set of people who work on these things. Our model is mostly strategic and about getting insights for our own business and about, we do license patents. Somebody just asked that. So we do have a lot of strategic relationships. We look for a pipeline of alliances, and we look for a pipeline of acquisitions. And we do some investment, not as much as some other firms. We invest in startups who are raising a round if they already have a commercial relationship with IBM, not just out and about randomly. So that's what we do.
That's great. And can you also explain how IBM, how many divisions are there, how many units, so that people, we want them to have a mindset of, okay, a large corporation is still, you can still approach, and so as long as you know the map, the lay of the land.
Yeah, so real quick, the consulting business has about 14 different verticals. So everything from energy and utilities to financial services and healthcare and so forth. We have a hardware business that has storage and mid-range servers and mainframes, and also does some work in quantum and other emerging technologies. We have a research division that does lots of different things. We have a dozen labs all over the world. We actually do still spend money on basic research, which is unusual these days. And then we have the business units and software, AI applications like IoT and blockchain, and what we do with the weather company. We have hybrid cloud, we have public cloud, we have security, we have data and AI, we have a new networking division, and let's see, a division on automation. So these are business units that each run their own P&L, and there's a general manager running each of those, and the software general managers all roll up to a single senior vice president who is visiting Silicon Valley in a couple of weeks.
That's great. Great to get the perspective, Deborah. Now I introduce Jerry, and he will take over as the moderator of the panel discussion, and then we have about half an hour, and then Jerry will give the closing remarks and close today's event. And once again, I always like to give the context of how I know people. Like I know Deborah because I have been involved with GTS conference. They just had their 19th year. It's Silicon Valley's one of iconic conference with alumni speaker list better than any other conference because it started by one of the founding VC families. And that's how I know her over the years because I've been involved as an advisor. And now introducing Jerry. Jerry, serial entrepreneur with large exits in the 90s. And then he decided to give back and started US government program and agency for empowering the tech ecosystem. It's called Tech Futures Group. And he not only started it, he grew it. He raised money from state of California, NorCal SBDC. You know how difficult that is. And he accomplished. He picked us a few years ago to be a satellite. So Pitch Global, we are technically a satellite of government organization, and we can enable, grant advisory and others for companies in Northern California. And then Jerry retired last year during pandemic and moved to the East Coast, but he is helping us as entrepreneur in residence for CVCs and helping us deepen relationships with CVCs. So Jerry, I can't thank you enough for being a huge mentor who's really taken us to the next level by making us a government satellite in the last few years. So Jerry, floor is yours. I am not going to participate more because you're just going to take over and maybe just pick a couple of questions for the Q&A and close the event because I talked enough and I managed to get whatever I wanted to, like get the entrepreneur's perspective out. And you have a lot to discuss today. So we want people to comment on what Eric said, and that itself will take another extra 10 minutes. And Jerry, please take a few minutes to talk about US government funding, how it works, how AppWorks is also a CVC for DoD, and things like that. So floor is yours, Jerry.
Okay, real quick, I just want to make sure we're supposed to be finished by another.
We have half an hour,
5
by
minutes?
11. By 11.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so I'm Jerry Barano. I did start Tech Futures Group. Tech Futures Group is part of the SBDC, Small Business Development Center. It's a program of the SBDC. And we help entrepreneurs and small tech businesses reach the next level. We worked with closely with about 250 companies over the last 7 years and helped them raise just about $350 million. Let me start. First of all, I want to thank both Andrew and Deborah for being here today. And let me just start really quickly with, I want to kick the whole discussion up a level and see what is your view of the role of the CVC in the corporation? Are you sort of a part of the operating unit, arm of the operating unit to be a scout for technology? Are you sort of the guiding light for innovations in the entire corporation? Are you sort of a lead gen for M&A? What do you see as your primary role as the CVC? Because you all have corporate masters. So for your corporate master, I'll start with you, Deborah, and then Andrew.
The answer is yes.
Okay. What's the primary role? Which is the one that you see as sort of one that's really guiding you more day to day?
It's what's happening in the business units and the operating units. I used to actually be in the software business, and 2 years ago I moved into corporate strategy, corporate development, but I still have all the relationships in the business units. Because look at it this way, we're talking about how startups can connect with corporations. Who owns the business relationships with the clients? Who owns the products? I don't. And somebody asked about IP before. I'm a safe way to evaluate opportunities because I don't own any products. So, I'm not going to take somebody else's IP and try to make something with it because I can't even do that. So the relationships with the business units are important. It all rolls from a corporate, from the CEO, the overall strategy for IBM. And I have a deck I use to explain to VCs and startups what that is. But most startups are doing something pretty specific. It could be horizontal, but it's still pretty specific. And so it fits with different parts of the business. IBM is not monolithic. We have lots of different businesses. So somebody who's doing, threat intelligence is not doing the same thing that somebody's doing, to understand data fabrics, right? And so it's important to understand how things fit.
So what role, I'm just going to do a follow-up and then Andrew, I'll turn to you, but what role do you play in helping somebody who might have a technology that crosses a bunch of business units, help them identify, oh, you're talking to this business unit, but you might want to chat with that one. Is that a role that you see yourself playing?
I do, and I'm careful about it because some companies have lots of people in them and some companies have a few. When I do a triage and have my very first briefing with the startup, I also always ask them how many people they have and where they are and what roles they have. So if they have 10 people, we're going to look at one business unit. If they have 100 people, we can look at 2 or 3 because, they have to have, it's an opportunity cost to work with a corporate versus, filling out your own product portfolio, going to market with your own people and having your own customers. It has to fit with your strategy, and people only have so many hours in the day. And so we have to be careful about what we think is appropriate. I once sourced an M&A deal when the company was 3 people in France. Over time, the company grew bigger, but by the time we bought them, they had 40 touch points in IBM, and that was just stupid.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, I think a corporate can actually strangle with.
Right. So I try to help move that over.
God knows what. And before you know it, you're dead. As a startup, I've been in that situation. So just be aware. Okay, Andrew, what's the primary role you see within TDK Venture, or within the company, not with TDK Ventures, but the role of TDK Ventures within TDK? Again, is it an arm of the operating unit where you're trying to help them reach their goals, or is it guiding light sort of way up on top? We're going to tell you where the big innovations are. Here's what we need to look at. Funnel for corporate innovation type of thing, or lead gen for M&A. What do you view as your primary role?
TDK Ventures' objective, or I should say mission, is a long-term strategic exploration mission. It's not about M&A. It's not about anything about a business unit. It's not about identifying revenues here or there. It's about long-term strategic exploration of various market opportunities.
So it's sort of one way of looking at it is you'd be like the guiding light for the corporation, for innovation. Is that what you're saying?
I suppose you could say that. I don't know that I would use those words. I think that every single part of the organization should be a guiding light. Be contributing to the overall strategy. That said, I do think TDK Ventures takes a unique role in being able to build relationships with a number of innovative startup companies. And so that I would say is unique, but really the big picture is in leveraging our position to look at long-term strategic exploration.
So you're not guided as much by the corporation. You're sort of out there saying, okay, we're going to be looking out to the world, see what the big strategic or sort of innovations are, and then bring them back to the strategy part of the organization. Where do you bring it back to? Where do those insights come back to?
We share insights with the entire organization.
Okay.
Everybody.
And you guys report to where? To the CEO, office of the CEO? And that's true of you as well, Deborah?
Oh, corporate strategy and corporate development, which is actually in the CFO's office.
Okay, CFO.
And he reports to the CEO.
Okay.
But we're a much bigger company. There's more layers.
I'm aware of that. Okay, so who measures you? At the end of the year, who pats you on the head and said you've done a good job?
So all of our clients internally measure us to some extent. In fact, in an hour, I have a quarterly update with the guy who runs all the M&A teams. So, he gets to contribute to were we helpful. We do some of the things that Andrew had mentioned. We are looking for insights about innovation. We look for, deals we can do this year, but we also look for innovations that might be important in 5 years from now or more. So, so we bring those ideas back to the strategist, either at the corporate level or within the specific business units. Each business unit has a team that does strategy, M&A, business development, alliances, and so forth, and supports the product managers. And so all of those people need to know what's going on outside. So we're bring the outside in guys.
Okay. But the business units have their own sort of, let's figure out what's going on in the world, and they go through you as well. Is that what's going on?
Right. Yeah, we work together. Yeah. They don't live in a closet. They read a lot of the same things I do, but what they don't have is the relationships with the VCs and people in the ecosystem. So I have that direct connection and can feed that information back to them.
Okay. Andrew, who measures you? And how are you measured?
Well, we're measured across a variety of different KPIs. So some are financial, some are strategic, and these come across a variety of areas of the organization. And so, it's very much comprehensive. It's not a single thing, but it's a comprehensive set of measurements and a different number of teams and individuals that work with us on.
Are there numbers of people, because you had mentioned numbers in your slide deck? Are there numbers that your sort of people are saying, well, you didn't meet this number or that number for the ventures?
I wouldn't frame it like that. I wouldn't frame it as there's some number here that I would frame it as we do have a vision for I think what we want to accomplish, and I think we do have a vision for certain metrics that I think we want to fulfill, and we strive to do that as best as we can. And I think it's in conjunction with many different people from across the organization.
Okay, and you, Deborah, do you have numbers?
We have numbers. We develop them ourselves to a large extent. How many management meetings did we have with a startup where we brought them in to meet managers in the business unit? How many briefings did we hold? One of the things we get measured on is outreach. We want this influential community to be very aware of what IBM does and cares about so that we're relevant in the market. We don't throw the army of people and marketing money at it that Amazon does, for example. So we have to address it in other ways, and we do it at a very personal level to a large extent. So we get measured on that, and we get measured on, how many times we brought an executive from the business unit to visit a VC or a startup. How many startups did we meet that made it through the funnel and became partners? There are a lot of different ways to look at it, actually.
And also, you had mentioned earlier VC connections.
Right, exactly.
Not just startups, but also the VC connections.
Right. So one of the things our management wants to know, my immediate managers and also the guys in the business units, they want to know, if these are the top tier VCs, what is our relationship with them? Could we just get a meeting with them anytime we want to? And the answer is yes, because we've built these relationships over a period of time. So I have these senior executives coming in the first week of December, and I've got, a whole bunch of meetings set up with them with, the likes of the top guys here in Silicon Valley.
Okay, great, interesting. I'm sort of riffing off your presentation, Andrew. So you talked a lot about partnerships, but as I was listening to you, it sounded more like the partnership the startup would have with an operating unit rather than with the ventures arm. Was that a good interpretation, or do you want to?
Yeah, well, every CVC is different, and in some presentations ago, I shared kind of the big picture is it all depends on their objectives. Some are more financial, some are more strategic. The ones that are more financial, there would probably be less opportunity to have a kind of meaningful partnership with a CVC. For the ones that are more strategic, then there might actually be a number of opportunities. Some of the strategic CVCs have accelerators, have incubators, have various kinds of programs that can work directly with a startup and help them grow and create value together. That said, there are other CVCs that don't really focus on those areas, but instead try to encourage and facilitate partnerships between different business units or operating units of the corporate. And so I think, it's really understanding how that CVC operates and what the objectives are, and based on that, really understanding then which kind of group or team the startup would really be connecting with to affect the partnership.
Okay. Deborah, same question. Is it more startup to the operating unit is really what the partnership looks like?
We screen the opportunities. So
Goes
I
through you first.
evaluate, they see me first, and I evaluate because I know what our strategy is. At some level, I know what the strategy is of each business unit. So I mentioned data and AI as one of our divisions. I know what their top 5 priorities are for now and into next year. So if I meet a startup that's in one of those areas, yay, I'll go ask the business unit if they'd like to meet. If they say yes, I'll host the briefings. If they're not in one of those areas, then it depends on whether or not it's something we already do or it's not a priority, and then we'll just say no. But sometimes we also like to be surprised, so there are startups working on innovations that I never thought of and that our business units never thought of. And so we do want to see things that are, fortuitous opportunities that we hadn't thought of. And so we'll pay some attention to those. But for the most part, it's in some context.
Okay. But what I'm hearing you say, I think is a little different than I heard what Andrew said. Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong. But I think yours, Deborah, your IBM approach is come to the CVC, we'll tell you which operating unit is the right one for you to go
Correct.
for. And Andrew, yours is more, you can do it either way, or it's you can go talk to the operating unit first and they'll bring it to us.
Sorry, I should be clear. I apologize. So I think for Tdk Ventures, we have the flexibility of first exploring different types of partnerships with the startups, and we would sort of then act as conduits to identify the right sort of business group or team for that. Or we could also explore investment, and one doesn't have to start before another. Either we could start with either, and it really does depend on what the startup's needs are. And so I think there are cases where we explore various types of partnerships with the various between startups and the various business units. There are other times where we initially try to explore investment, and that would be sort of a Tdk Ventures thing where we look at sort of the merits of the business, the risks, and then make a decision to invest. And so I think, but even with the investment, we do have an eye to, our investment criteria is financial returns, strategic value with synergies, and sustainability. And so for every investment, we still have to have an eye for all of those. And that includes looking at what are the synergies with TDK and what are the kinds of strategic value that we can see from this relationship.
Okay, I want to add something about the venture capital community. So even if I segment what's going on in the venture world, there are thousands of fintech startups, right? So we don't have any capacity to evaluate every startup that's out there to find the ones that are the gems. We use the VC community as they've already done due diligence. They've already picked their bets. They're a good source of information about which things we ought to take a look at. And if they know us well enough, they make a good guess as to what will be a good fit. That's one of the reasons we hold the briefings just with the VCs, so they understand us better. They have context. They can suggest portfolio companies who would be a good fit. Now, we also meet companies through pitch events, like Casey's and Sasha Johnson's and others, but we really rely on the VCs for that. And we also rely on them for introductions. There have been cases where one of our business units wanted to meet a hot startup. The really good ones, you can't cold call, they don't answer you. But I usually know someone who's on their board and can get an introduction or can get help with due diligence. So those connections are multifaceted and very helpful.
Okay, ditto with you, Andrew, I suppose. You're using the VCs in the same kind of way. You're using other providers or partners in the same way to identify good companies.
Well, we do. We leverage a very wide network of investors, entrepreneurs, industry experts to identify promising investment opportunities, and we do. We try to have a very wide and sort of broad network to identify those opportunities. But in addition to that, we do our own research. You know, there are certain spaces that we look into, and we identify kind of where we think the interesting opportunities may be and why. And so we also develop our own insights that help us sort of clue into what we think might be the more attractive opportunities for investment.
Yeah, that makes sense. We do that too.
Okay, great. So if a startup has a relationship with one of your operating units, either having gone through, you know, the IBM or the TDK Ventures first, or however they do it, is it possible for a startup to get investments from two CVCs who have operating units in the same area, who might be competitors? Is that
so? No, not if we're direct competitors.
Okay.
Right. We do have multifaceted relationships. I mean, if you look at SAP, it's co-opetition. They're a vendor to us. We're a vendor to them. We compete with them. So, you know, it depends on what it is. We try to, we're happy to have, you know, we have a startup who works with us who has investment from Intel and from BMW. You know, so that's fine. There's, you know, several CVCs in the mix. They're not competitors of ours. They're clients and partners. So that's fine. But to answer a question that was asked earlier, I'm pretty sure that CVCs rarely lead. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they do. But it's not the predominant model. And in fact, they don't usually take board seats. They take board observer seats. So they operate a little bit differently than institutional investors do.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so let me ask about other relationships that might happen with the organization and whether you play a role in it at all. So one of the issues that I think a lot of startups have or want to get from, you know, corporates is obviously a lot of the resources the corporates can offer, both in terms of marketing, in terms of engineering, in terms of manufacturing, and other resources. Do you guys get involved at all with NREs, non-recurring engineering contracts? Is that something that you just say, hey, look, just talk to the operating unit, let them deal with it, as a way for the startup either to advance the R&D or to integrate more closely with the corporation?
So I can't make a decision to do an NRE or a JV or a spin out or something like that. I can suggest them. So if a startup desires a particular kind of a relationship, you know, the relationship is always a negotiation. You brainstorm about what will work on both sides, what fits your mutual goals, and then you decide how to approach that. If it's something like a joint development agreement or something like that, it's up to the operating unit to decide if they want to put the money and resources into it. I don't own any of that.
Okay.
I influence it. I don't own it.
Okay, Andrew?
I think my answer is pretty much the same as Deborah's. We don't enter into these kinds of agreements with startups, but we're happy to make introductions to the various business units that can make those kinds of arrangements. And yeah, we're happy to facilitate it and make introductions as much as possible. But we just don't make those kinds of decisions.
Okay. And then I assume that also means you don't make the decision in terms of pilot projects or anything like that, not just NREs.
Yeah. We're an investment company, and we're not an operating company in terms of driving business. That said, we do put a lot of effort into making sort of smart introductions to the right types of teams and organizations and business units that can make those decisions, and we're happy to do so. Just we ourselves can't make those kinds of arrangements.
Okay. All right. There was a question from the chat, and I encourage people to type their questions if they have them. Don't most corporations like to invest first? Some of you take money elsewhere, won't work with you due to conflict of interest concerns.
Oh, gosh, no. So historically, CVCs have invested in B and C rounds. They're starting to invest earlier. So now you'll see CVCs invest in A rounds. We usually do Bs, but we have some quantum investments that are very early stage. But no, because I said before that we like to see an institutional investor in the round, and that we're happy to have other CVCs in the round if they're not competitive. And so, you know, we usually like to know that the startup is able to raise money and that they're starting to show some success in the market. It can still be early stage, but it has to be de-risked in some way.
Okay.
Tdk Ventures invest early. We invest in seed, Series A, Series B. So for us, we're very open. I think that I am seeing a trend where there are other CVCs who are investing early as well. So
that's true. It's trending, yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, there's a wide variety. And actually, what I see as an interesting thing is that for a given set of CVCs, the startup will want to really get to know that CVC and their strategy, and then sort of figure out, okay, this is the best way where our startup can work with this CVC. Some they may want to work with earlier, some they may choose to work with later, but it really does depend on the specifics. And I think there's the beautiful thing about the marketplace now is there's such a wide variety of CVCs. Startups now have the ability to identify who they can best work with to achieve their long-term aims.
Okay. Another question that's come up is what's the role of intrapreneur? I don't know.
Yeah, no, we have lots of those guys. And yeah, I mentioned we have a research division, so you could think of them as that kind of, because some of the stuff that comes out of research is patented and some of it is put into products and some of it is sold off and some of it sits on the shelf, you know, all kinds of stuff. There is a formal entrepreneurship program run out of corporate strategy. It's called Organic Growth Ventures, and there are people who run that program and encourage people to develop business plans for new kinds of businesses, which could be built internally or spun out and so forth. And so I think most big corporations have something, you know, some sort of entrepreneurship.
Ditto with you, Andrew, you want to add to that?
Yeah, TDK does have entrepreneurship programs, and TDK is very serious about identifying internal opportunities to start new ventures. And this is something that is exciting, and lots of folks are really taking serious look into it.
Do you ever try to get the entrepreneur hooked up with a startup, or is it, you know, let's let them do their own thing?
It's hard because it's hard to do. We usually try to do it through their investors, through the VCs again, but it's hard because a lot of entrepreneurs don't have the knowledge or experience to know what makes a good standalone company. You know, so they have to be coached through that. They have to be coached through, is there a good market fit? You know, is this venture fundable? We do of course, you know, make sure that startups are connected with the business units, and every business unit has guys who are working on new things. So it is in that sense, not in the sense of a formal program.
Yeah, my experience with entrepreneurs is that they really know their own company really, really well.
Yeah, right.
And that just really focuses their entire thinking. They have a hard time breaking outside of you know, TDK or IBM or whatever company they're with.
Oh, there's a question about Kyndryl. I can say it in like one sentence.
Okay.
Kyndryl spin-out has been completed. It's a separate company. It was we had two consulting divisions. One was called Global Business Services, which is now rebranded IBM Consulting. It's the consultancy in the different vertical industries. Global Technology Services was BPO, SO, managing data centers, all the technical stuff, and that's what was spun out.
Okay.
The regular consulting business is still with IBM. The technical stuff was spun out. That one division.
Okay.
It was a big division.
Okay, so let me, I think stories are always a good way for people to capture a lot of information. I'm going to ask you to give a story of a startup that approached your organization. I'm not necessarily talking about the venture group, but it could, the entire company, and how it worked, whether you just how you decided to invest, what you liked about them. We'll do a success story. If we have time, we'll do one that didn't work out so well. Either one of you want to go first? I'll sort of do a towing cost here. Anybody ready?
I'm trying to think of what to use as an example. We have a lot of them.
I know. I should have sent that to you by email beforehand.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Okay, I'll do one. I'm not going to name names though, because I don't know which ones of these are referenceable.
Yeah.
But there was a company in the data space that is venture backed. That looked like a good fit for that business in IBM. They did something that we don't do very well, so it wasn't very overlapping, little overlapping, but not really, and could really enhance what we do for clients. So I got in touch with the investor, got an introduction to the CEO, hosted a few briefings with the business unit, and then the business unit picked up the relationship and I dropped back out of it. And they're on a path to an OEM agreement. So we do co-sell, lightweight co-sell co-marketing agreements with lots of firms. We do reseller agreements with a smaller set of firms when there's a good technical integration and business fit. And we do OEM agreements, which are really tightly integrated. And this one will be an OEM.
Okay. Andrew, do you have a?
Yeah, I can share. There was a company that we had been introduced to through an investing partner. We had some initial discussions and were really kind of blown away in a positive way with the company and the technology. I followed up by doing some analysis into the space and really saw that this is a very unique technology. They came up with a unique technology. I won't describe what it is, but very unique and surprising, and something that we thought was compelling. Then I did a further deep dive into competition and the dynamics of the space. We found that this company was actually doing something very special. We introduced them to one of the business units at TDK. They hit it off, had a wonderful meeting. And through a number of discussions, we realized, there were some strong synergies. We invested. And then since that time, the company's been growing, has been doing extremely well. I can't get into details, but they're doing quite well. And also continuing to collaborate with teams at TDK. So very impressive opportunity.
Both examples used investment VCs or investment contacts have brought the idea to you. Is that the norm? Is that the one that typically succeeds the best?
It succeeds if it's a good fit. It doesn't matter where it came in. We use the VCs because it's an expediency. They've done due diligence and I have relationships and they can suggest things and it's a good fit. But as long as
it's a head start. It's a head start.
It's a head start. It's triage. So as long as the company, the startup is a good fit, it really doesn't matter where it came from. It's just a way to make our jobs work better.
Jerry, I have to interrupt because we have till 11. So I'm gonna do a rapid fire round for all three of you to sum this up, because we need your comments on Eric's interview. So what we need is 2 minutes from Deborah. How do you think Eric can get deeper, because he's already working with this joint venture of IBM and Marx in Mexico? What advice will you give him? That's first question. Second question to Andrew. What do you think? If Eric, I think, is sitting on gold mine, because one of the biggest problems in this country is inflation, and this cargo is a very hidden driver of that. So if suddenly they need to make millions and billions of sensors, how should they start thinking about it? And Jerry, can you just give some comment on app work? How people can go deeper with app work, or Eric can. So on that note, Deborah, floor is yours.
Yeah, so TradeLens is owned by the IoT organization, and the IoT group has some key strategic initiatives. One is asset management. One is using IoT for maintenance, like on railroads or windmills or things like that. One is logistics and supply chain. And in fact, smart supply chain is a huge opportunity and a huge focus for us now. So those people are all over TradeLens and the relationship with Maersk. So what needs to happen next is to get an introduction to the business development executive who is part of the business unit.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of sort of manufacturing and scaling, the way I would typically suggest for a start to think about it is think about their business in phases. So you're probably going to start with, let's call it a laboratory phase or research phase, then maybe a small pilot phase, then a large pilot phase, and then some kind of mass production. In each phase, you want to be partnering with the right partners that can help you to scale. And so it could be scale in terms of supply chain, getting the right raw materials, whatever have you. But it can also be scale in terms of manufacturing, putting things together and making it all work. And those are two very different things. And so what I suggest is for each phase, identifying the right partners who have done that kind of work in the past and can demonstrate that they have the capacity to do that. So it really does mean spending a lot of time in conversations and really doing your own due diligence. But I think at the end of the day, you'll be able to find the right partners that can deliver for you when you need them. And then also, I would say a lot of people think about multi-sourcing. I'm not going to say a blanket rule on that, but what I would say is in general, having multiple relationships at a given phase can be advantageous, especially considering things come up, things change, and there's no way to anticipate that. So having a set of different vendors can be beneficial in some cases.
Great. And Jerry, please make your comment on the app works and how Eric could get deeper into it, and then you can end the today's discussions.
Okay, so Eric, you probably know the folks at Tech Futures Group.
Yes.
They have someone who knows a lot about the military, the DoD, which includes the Air Force, of course.
Right.
So you should get in contact with Stuart.
Stuart, yep. Oh, definitely. Yep. Stuart Berkowitz, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's great. He's done any number of SBIRs. So the military, including the Air Force, of course, works a little differently because they're trying to solve a military problem, but they recognize that if there's a commercial solution to their military problem, the cost goes way, way down.
Well, right.
So they're very interested in helping get technologies become commercialized.
Yes. Dual use, they call that, by the way. Yeah.
Dual use, right.
Yeah.
So that's really the whole idea of the DoD. AFWorks is a section of that, and they're worried about talent as well, but they're also worried about the commercialization. So if you want to add something, go ahead, Eric.
No, that all makes perfect sense. And I've already spoken with Stuart Berkowitz. He really does know an awful lot about this stuff. He gave me some great tips a few months ago, which I have implemented on paper. I mean, in terms of filing the stuff with the Defense Department. His best advice was don't budget for patents or the whole thing goes off the rail instantly. Don't they're going to ask you, what are you going to spend the money on? Don't even use the word patents or you get kicked out instantly. So,
right. I mean, that's true. That's true. That's true of the SBIR in general. Okay. However, there is a 7% in the SBIR budget for profit, for your profit.
6. It's 6 now, but that's okay.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
It might have changed.
Yeah.
But that can be used for patents.
Oh, right. Yeah.
You can use that
keep it a secret. Don't tell anyone.
The other thing that's important to know is there's SBIR phase 1 and 2.
Yeah.
If you've won a phase 1, you can apply to any SBIR phase 2 in any agency.
Ah, okay.
So it's not just, if you won Air Force SBI 1, you can only apply to a SBIR phase 2 in Air Force. No, you can do it in any agency, not just DoD. I'm talking about any agency.
Okay,
So
very interesting.
keep that in mind. So
Yeah.
all phase 2, which are the $1 million plus, bigger contracts or grants are open to you anywhere. So FYI.
We think of that as recycling our tax dollars, by the way.
Yeah, no, I know. It never comes through 100%.
My tax dollars.
Yeah.
Yours too.
Okay, so I want to thank, I think we've got a minute or two left. I want to thank, first of all, everybody for being here. I want to thank Andrew and Deborah for helping understand that there's a difference between CVCs. Some are taught more through the CVC and then off to the operating unit. Some can work both ways. And that to really understand and get to a partnership, you have to understand the needs at the end of the day of the operating units so that you can integrate closely with what they're trying to do. Is that a good summary?
Yep.
Okay. All right, thank you again.
Thank you.
I will leave it to Casey if you want to say one last piece of wisdom.
No, Jerry, I cannot top what you just said. And the last round, all I can say is this rapid fire round, that's what we want to bring to the world, because bring startups, have live use cases and solve the problems. We cannot, that's an oversimplification, pardon me. Give them a guide and give them more options than what they had perceived till now. I think that's how we can create real change. And thanks everybody who has taken part in this. And we will see you again on most probably 10th of December.
And I'm off to the gym. See ya.
I'm off to more meetings. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.